Hello and welcome to Projector, and on this episode, Steven Spielberg gives us another close encounter in the sci-fi thriller Disclosure Day. Daniel Kellner, played by Josh O'Connor, is on the run with his girlfriend Jane, played by Eve Hewson, carrying classified secrets he stole from his employer Wardex, headed by Colin Firth, Noah Scanlon, who are pursuing them relentlessly. Meanwhile in Kansas City, Emily Blunt's Margaret Fairchild starts to exhibit bizarre behaviour, including speaking a strange language during a live TV weather forecast. Jane and Daniel are drawn together by a shared mission, full disclosure to a secret hidden from the world for 70 years. In 1977, Steven Spielberg followed up the first ever blockbuster, Jaws, with Close Encounters of the Third Kind, about discovering that we are not alone. But it wasn't about aliens. Not really. It was much more focused on the human experience of that knowledge, an encounter that changes Richard Dreyfuss's Roy Neary forever. He becomes so obsessed that it consumes his whole life, drawn towards it like a moth to a flame. He has to know nothing else matters. And Spielberg has rarely stopped watching the skies since. 4 years later, he gave us E.T., a movie that took them from up above to right here. Those two movies especially, along with Spielberg's filmography in general, defined American sci-fi ever since. His influence can be felt everywhere, especially because his own Amblin Entertainment produced many of those movies like, say, Men in Black, but even if they didn't, many of their directors have a direct connection to Spielberg somewhere, be it Joe Dante, Robert Zemeckis, or J.J. Abrams. When Spielberg revisited Aliens, they were far less benevolent, as his remake of War of the Worlds was unusually brutal and haunting, defined by the trauma of the Iraq War and September 11th. The Spielberg who made that was much more recognisable as the guy that did Saving Private Ryan than his earlier fare. When he tried to revisit his earlier self with Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, merging his iconic franchise with his UFO conspiracy themes, the combination didn't really work and is one of his weakest films. But even there, you also had characters who became fixated on wanting to know, even if it literally destroyed them. Knowledge was their treasure indeed. Nevertheless, when Spielberg does Aliens, it's a big deal, and that's why Disclosure Day is being promoted with his name above the title rather than any of the star names, because him making a movie like this is an event. Spielberg came up with the story himself, having been inspired in an article in the New York Times called Glowing Auras and Black Money, about the Pentagon's UFO program and leaked footage from a whistleblower involved. Spielberg took the outline to his regular co-collaborator David Koepp, who has written the scripts for the first two Jurassic Parks and the aforementioned War of the Worlds and Crystal Skull. And though he remains a legendary director, Spielberg's track record more recently has been a bit checkered, as he alternates between commercial projects and more personal, prestigious projects. It definitely feels like he's more invested in the latter films than he is the former, with The Fabelmans being one of his very best in my opinion, but it's sadly underperformed at the box office. Disclosure Day appears after a 4-year gap, and the question becomes whether or not Spielberg can still channel who he was at the start of his career. It's not a complete home run, but it proves he very much still can. Oh, and full disclosure here, while I'm going to give my usual in-depth review without giving away too many major plot spoilers, this really is a movie where ideally you want to go in knowing as little about it as you can. That's been something that's been made quite difficult thanks to Universal's marketing, which I frankly think has shown far too much. But if you're being super cautious, I can understand if you want to wait until after you've seen it to watch this review. That's in part because the first hour of the film has this air of mystery about it, especially as it starts in media res. Daniel is already on the run, Wardex is already on his trail, and the opening confrontation serves to establish the characters. But it's all very cryptic and vague at first, and it's not even clear what he has stolen or why. If anything, Jane really is the audience surrogate, as Daniel's partner that's been pulled into events as leverage against him, and she serves as a vessel for exposition, mostly delivered on the fly. But we know who the good guy is because Josh O'Connor is very good at bringing a sense of quiet integrity to his characters, as seen recently in Wake Up Dead Man. Daniel has morality to him, even if he's somewhat guarded, because he knows the truth and sincerely believes that making it public is the absolute right thing thing to do. That's why he's turned whistleblower, because it's bigger than him, even if he has to do it at great risk to himself. And belief is a major part of the movie, and I don't just mean in a I want to believe X-Files poster sort of way. Religion is a surprisingly prominent theme, especially early on, as Jane takes Daniel to a convent to meet her mother, Sister Maura, played by Elizabeth Marvel, and reveals that she used to be a nun, and that comes as a big surprise to Daniel, but Jane tells him she merely left out a part of her story because she knows it would change the way people see her. It introduces this idea that there are hidden paths and secrets, even to those closest to us or ourselves, something that becomes apparent with multiple characters throughout. But even though Jane left the convent, her faith is still a major part of her identity and how she sees the world, and it shapes how she interprets the knowledge that Daniel tells her. When she's shown proof of extraterrestrial life, her main concern is theological. Will this end the belief in God if there is evidence of life on other planets? Surely that seems like a contradiction, a set of beliefs that cannot coexist together. But Disclosure Day actually argues that it's not, and is further evidence of the divine, in fact, of something beyond our own understanding. While the whole movie hinges on undeniable evidence, it is also up to individual choice as to what people choose to do with that knowledge through their own unique beliefs and understanding. Although, certainly for a while, that is something that Jane struggles to reconcile, that kind of doubt in both herself, her faith, and whether or not the world is ready for it. Jane, as the outsider, is the embodiment of all these complex feelings, something that Houston conveys well with her performance, but it makes it a bit of a shame that she's largely sidelined for much of the film's second half, even as the character is given arguably the most critical choice at the film's conclusion. What Daniel's plotline most evokes is the conspiracy thrillers of the 70s, and that's something deliberately acknowledged by Spielberg when he references Watergate, and he's already covered that kind of era with The Post and the Pentagon Papers. He's not the first to compare this moment of political upheaval and turmoil with our growing distrust in our institutions to that point in time, but it is rare to see Spielberg so explicitly making a commentary about our state of the world. Again, not since War of the Worlds has he felt this charged. Spielberg rose to prominence in the 70s, but Close Encounters was ultimately an optimistic film, and while Disclosure Day is too, there is more of an edge of cynicism here than he had back then. The film's antagonists, Wardex, are a private government contractor with massive amounts of oversight and control, with huge amounts of surveillance, with this giant bank of screens watching everywhere, the kind you see very commonly in spy thrillers but on a massive scale. It is telling that the film has a certain amount of empathy for Colin Firth's Scanlan, as he does make some understandable arguments that, from his point of view, that this knowledge will completely upend the social order and maybe even accelerate global instability. But his desire to stop their release is also a selfish one, not least of which because it will also personally expose his and Wardex's cruelty and abuses as well. Scanlan is someone who has at some point lost their humanity and has become a cold and ruthless keeper of Wardex's secrets, no matter how unethical the method. And Scanlan's surveillance goes way beyond the tracking we have now, as he uses the alien technology as a way to invade upon people and their reality in a way that's truly terrifying. There's a key confrontation between Scanlan and Jane, and it's a moment where Spielberg taps into horror imagery in a way that he hasn't in a long time. It represents the peak of Jane's crisis with her faith, especially represented by her necklace of the crucifixion as a key prop, as Scanlan takes advantage of her moment of weakness. That whole bit has tropes that you'd more commonly associate with demonic possession movies, especially the way she uses pain to try and break his hold over her, which itself is a reference to the nails through Jesus' hands. It's genuinely unsettling and tense, and Firth is especially creepy as the increasingly sweaty and desperate figure of temptation, and it's one of several points where the religious allegory is made very explicit. I do have to admit though that the aforementioned secrecy also held the film back for me in a way, because it kept me at a distance from what was going on. I did have a bit of trouble in the first half fully connecting with the movie because of that, although I think the fact that I was ahead of what was going on thanks to the marketing didn't help either, but I just wasn't as invested in Daniel's story. I was much more engaged with Margaret's plot, mostly because it's far more unique. She's a meteorologist who is never quite settled, constantly moving from place to place and hoping to become an anchor someday, rather than just doing shimmies in her weather reports. And then an event happens, and just like Close Encounters' Roy, suddenly her life is completely changed. She starts speaking in other languages without even realising. She can suddenly know things about strangers just by looking at them. Oh, and has a full-blown meltdown on live television. Those early scenes are played for comic effect, but Margaret is a woman unravelling, and she doesn't even know why. Her sense of self is utterly thrown out of balance, and she's frightened. But she also finds herself drawn into something that she did not choose, but may be her destiny. At one point she admits that she's a passenger in her own life now, but even if the character is to some extent passive, Blunt is not. She gives a phenomenal performance in an extremely complicated role, mixing the turmoil and fear Margaret has with some deft comic notes. And like Roy, Margaret becomes utterly inexplicable to her boyfriend Jackson, played by Wyatt Russell, who even before all this has far less ambition than her. He just wants things to return to normal, even trying to stand in her way, but she simply can't go back to the way things were. She has to know why this is happening to her. And Disclosure Day started to draw me in once these two storylines dovetailed together, in large part thanks to Common Domingo's Hugo, another Ward X defector who is very much orchestrating events. Hugo spent a lot of the movie on phone calls to Daniel and Margaret, giving them crucial information and instructions and helping lead the two together, while standing around on a set that's being constructed around him. He's essentially directing them, so it's perhaps not surprising that I read Hugo as being something of a stand-in for Spielberg himself, and that makes a lot of sense given how Hugo functions as a charismatic mouthpiece for him in his most major scene, arguing against Scanlon, giving a truth that people are starved for the truth, and he's confident that humanity will accept this major shift in their understanding. And like Spielberg, Hugo's the man with the plan, and knows where this is all heading, even if Daniel and Margaret don't know the parts they're playing. If nothing else, Disclosure Day serves as a reminder of just how brilliant Spielberg is as a director, and particularly as a visual storyteller. Many of his signature techniques are all over this, especially his ones that change so dramatically as to feel like multiple shots, and most other directors would have just filmed them like that to their detriment. There are scenes where the camera swoops in through a car windshield, or motion control shots where characters transition before your eyes that remind you of just how unique Spielberg still is. And though Disclosure Day isn't an action film, it does have a small handful of inventive set-piece moments, like Daniel and Margaret's car being dragged along by a moving train, or a scene involving invisible objects that shows he still brings a sense of play and fun to the big moments. But the one thing especially that Spielberg has never lost is a sense of whimsy and wonder, particularly seen with the alien elements that he seems genuinely enthralled and fascinated by the prospect of. Those are the moments with the most striking imagery, aided as usual by the music from John Williams in his 30th collaboration with the director and a major part of Spielberg's identity as a filmmaker. Williams' score is gentle and beautiful, with a poignant twinkle to it that stirs your emotions, especially towards the end. It's classic John Williams. But despite all of its blockbuster trappings, Disclosure Day is not so much interested in aliens than about us. It's a movie that openly wears its heart and its message on its sleeve, even as it comments on a tired despair, and that's where it has the most spiritual connection with Close Encounters, a movie where Spielberg famously said about it, if we can talk to extraterrestrials, why not with the Reds in the Cold War? That idea is especially prominent here. Running in the background of the movie is rising tensions between the US and Russia and North Korea, and the threat of World War III is imminent. Humanity is on the brink of either destruction or enlightenment, although the execution of this is a little inconsistent for what should be a rising source of tension. You think it'd be more of a motivating force that this is the moment to get the word out, because there might not be another. And in some scenes, you do see people panic buying and so on and so forth, but in others, it just seems like everyone is going about their day business as usual, and it doesn't feel like the world might end at any given moment. But Close Encounters' themes of communication are revisited here, and more importantly, of understanding. This is a movie where compassion literally becomes a superpower. Spielberg has always been unabashedly sentimental, and he continues to have a great deal of faith in people at large, even when some people might consider that to be naive and simplistic. It feels like Spielberg wants to stir a debate, not simply about how he would respond to the situation, but where we are right now. He asks a lot of questions, but doesn't pretend that he knows the answers, especially in that deliberately open-ended conclusion that might be frustratingly abrupt for some, but leaves things on a hopeful note, with a very on-the-nose final word summing it up. Disclosure Day might be the rare example where you get the mainstream and the prestigious Spielberg rolled into one, especially when he's more recently shone in drama than his genre work. It's a thoughtful and impassioned film with big ideas executed in an uneven fashion, especially as Kep's script can be clunky, but it is one I can see growing on me with repeat viewings potentially. I don't think it's a classic like Close Encounters, in part because it's more Spielberg revisiting past ideas than giving us something new that is as iconic as the famous spaceship from that film. I found it was mid-tier Spielberg, but even that is better than a lot of directors' best, as you still get flashes of his greatness, and Emily Blunt in particular gives a tremendous performance. Ultimately, it serves as a reminder that Steven Spielberg wants to believe in us most of all. If you like this review and you want to support my work, you can give me a tip on my Ko-fi page, or with YouTube's Super Thanks feature, which is right below the video. Or you can have a close encounter with my Patreon, where you can see my videos early among other perks, including access to my Discord server, and you can also join YouTube memberships for similar perks. Or you can just simply like, share and hype the video. It really does help more than you know. Until next time, I'm Matthew Buck, fading out.